What happens when greatness costs more than anyone should ever have to pay? Larry Bird gave everything to basketball, his body, his pride, his very identity. And in return, the game gave him glory championships, MVPs, and a legacy carved into NBA history.
I'm really proud to receive this award. Once you're considered the best, you want to stay there.
But it also left him with scars that never healed, regrets that never faded, and a life at age 68 is so quiet, many mistake it for sadness. This isn't the story of a star who went broke, or a legend undone by scandal. It's something far more human and, in some ways, far more haunting. Because when you strip away the banners and the highlights, you're left with a man who sacrificed everything for greatness and is still paying the price today. From the moment Larry Bird stepped onto an NBA court in 1979, the league knew it wasn't getting just another rookie, it was witnessing a man who would bend basketball to his will. Bird didn't glide across the floor with the effortless grace of Magic Johnson, nor did he soar through the air like Michael Jordan. Instead, he imposed himself in a way that was raw, gritty, and uncompromising. He played the game like every possession could be his last. If there was a loose ball, Bird wasn't just diving for it, he was launching himself into the hardwood, uncaring if his body took the punishment. If a rebound was up for grabs, he was muscling through giants who towered over him, clawing and wrestling until the ball was his. It made him unstoppable, the perfect embodiment of blue-collar toughness. Boston adored him for it. His teammates respected him for it. His rivals feared him because of it.
Larry Bird would put fear in me and everyone else.
But there was a hidden price to that sacrifice, a debt his body was quietly tallying, one that would come due long before he was ready to pay. By the late 1980s, Bird's body began to betray him. At first, it was a nagging tightness in his back, something a little stretching could fix. Then it became pain-sharp, searing, unrelenting that seemed to wrap itself around his spine like chains pulling tighter with every movement. Soon, something as simple as walking across the locker room became a trial. Trainers and doctors begged him to rest, to sit out, to save himself for the long run. But rest was never part of Larry Bird's vocabulary. His answer was always the same: tape it tighter, strap on the back brace, and lace up the sneakers. Fans saw the highlights. They saw the jawing with opponents, the incredible hustle plays. What they didn't see were the mornings when Bird could barely get out of bed. They didn't see the 2 hours it sometimes took him just to loosen his body enough to function like a normal human being. For every game that electrified Boston Garden, there were nights he went home to ice packs and sleepless hours in pain. The reality of his suffering was laid bare for the entire world to see in 1992, during the Barcelona Olympics. The Dream Team, the greatest roster of talent the sport had ever seen, was a parade of joy and domination. Magic and Jordan were all smiles, Charles Barkley was cracking jokes, everyone was basking in the glory of being untouchable. But not Bird. Cameras caught him stretched out on the sideline, lying down, unable to sit upright for long stretches because the pain was that unbearable.
TV laying down, and then they told me that he had to lay down on planes.
Retirement didn't free him. In fact, it mocked him. Bird once admitted with a brutal honesty that he kept thinking that since he was retired, one day he would wake up and the pain would finally be gone. But he was wrong. Decades later, even at 68 years old, Larry Bird still carries that pain with him every single day. The body that once made him a legend is the same body that refuses to let him forget the cost of his greatness. But as devastating as his back injuries were, they weren't the only enemy lurking in Bird's life. There was another moment, sudden, frightening, and almost fatal, when the toughness that defined him nearly led to tragedy in front of a packed arena. Larry Bird suffers from atrial fibrillation, a condition where the heart beats irregularly, skipping its natural rhythm and sometimes spiraling into chaotic overdrive. Imagine your chest pounding out of sync, your breath catching short, and your body suddenly feeling like it's about to give out. For some, it's a nuisance. For others, it's life-threatening. For Larry Bird, it was a shadow he carried silently, tucked behind the toughness that defined him.
And Larry Bird is headed directly to the locker room for treatment.
That silence nearly caught up with him in 1998, when Bird was no longer the Celtics superstar, but the head coach of the Indiana Pacers, a team he had molded into one of the toughest squads in the league. And on this particular night, the stakes couldn't have been higher. The Pacers were going head-to-head with Michael Jordan's Chicago Bulls, the dynasty of the 1990 seconds. It was the kind of matchup every coach lives for. To the thousands of fans in the arena and the millions watching at home, Bird looked calm, sharp, and focused, pacing the sideline, calling plays, pushing his team to the limit. But inside, his chest was betraying him. His heartbeat wasn't steady. It was pounding erratically, slamming against his ribs like a drum out of control. Bird later admitted that in those agonizing minutes, he was begging the referee to blow the whistle just so he could catch a breath. When the timeout finally came, the mask slipped. Bird slumped into his chair, his face pale, his body drained, sweat pouring down as he tried to steady himself. To his players, it looked like exhaustion. To the medical staff, it was something far more alarming. Doctors confirmed it later. This wasn't fatigue. This was his heart acting up. The atrial fibrillation he had kept in the shadows was now front and center. And here's where the story turns from surprising to shocking. Because during his playing career, Bird had known about the problem. He had felt those racing rhythms before, but he never told the Celtics medical staff. Not once.
Because this was Larry's issue, and there was no sharing of his pain.
To Larry Bird, admitting weakness wasn't just uncomfortable, it was impossible. He had built his entire career on toughness, on never letting pain or fear show. To confess to a hidden heart condition, to admit that the engine driving his greatness might also betray him, that wasn't an option, so he hid it. Game after game, season after season, Bird carried a secret that could have ended everything in an instant. And he did it because in his mind, the risk of collapse was still better than the risk of looking vulnerable. That stubbornness, that relentless refusal to give in, gave fans some of the most unforgettable moments in NBA history. But it also brought him dangerously close to disaster. The 1998 scare wasn't just a warning shot. It was a reminder that for all of Bird's toughness, for all of his battles with broken bones and a battered back, the greatest fight he faced was one no one could see: his own heart. And yet, even after that terrifying episode, Bird's mindset didn't change. He wasn't about to let the world see him as fragile. He wasn't about to let anyone, teammate, player, or fan, believe that Larry Legend could be broken. But there was another struggle waiting for him, one tied not to his body but to the battles he fought off the court. Looking back now, Larry Bird admits something that still cuts deep. Maybe, just maybe, he should have walked away sooner. Bird once confessed, "I should have retired in 1988 or 1989.
I probably should have retired in 88, 89, but it's that competition."
That wasn't just empty reflection or some offhand remark. It was the unfiltered truth from a man who gave every piece of himself to the game. But to understand why he pushed himself so far, why he ignored every signal his body sent, you have to go back to French Lick, Indiana. Larry Bird grew up in a small town where work wasn't optional. His father, Joe, worked construction. His mother, Georgia, often held multiple jobs just to keep the family afloat. Bird himself has said that if you could walk, you could work. That's just how it was. Pain wasn't a barrier, it was part of survival. Everyone around him carried scars, whether from labor, loss, or life itself. So when Bird picked up a basketball, that same code applied. You didn't quit because it hurt, you played because stopping wasn't in the vocabulary. That blue-collar toughness became the foundation of his legend. It's what allowed him to dive for loose balls like they were paychecks, to play through broken bones and sprained ankles, to keep showing up even when his body screamed at him to stop. And it worked spectacularly. That mentality transformed a small-town kid into the face of the NBA, into the man who stood toe-to-toe with Magic Johnson and gave us one of the greatest rivalries in sports history. But here's the cruel paradox. The same mindset that made Larry Bird a champion also set the stage for his downfall. By the late 1980 seconds, his body wasn't whispering anymore. It was screaming. Back spasms, ruptured discs, endless pain that no amount of willpower could erase. And still, Bird couldn't walk away, because in his mind, retiring while he could still stand meant giving up, and giving up was unthinkable. By the time he finally stepped away in 1992,
Today I'm retiring, and
it wasn't a graceful farewell tour. It wasn't the perfect ending scripted in Hollywood. It was a man limping toward the finish line, his body broken, his nights sleepless, his mornings spent just trying to loosen up enough to walk. And here's the irony that hurts the most. He didn't need to prove a thing by then. Bird had already secured his place in basketball immortality. 3 straight MVPs, 3 championships with the Celtics, 2 finals MVPs, a Rookie of the Year, and a permanent spot in highlight reels that defined a generation. He was already cemented as one of the greatest players to ever touch a basketball. But because he couldn't let go, because he couldn't silence the voice from French Lick that told him to keep pushing, he left the game not with closure, but with scars that never healed. Physical scars, yes, the back that still torments him today, but also emotional scars, the haunting what-ifs of a man who wonders if walking away sooner could have saved him years of pain. And that's the tragedy tucked inside the triumph. Larry Bird didn't just sacrifice his body to win banners. He sacrificed years of his life where he might have lived without constant pain. He traded comfort for glory, and in doing so, secured a legacy, but at a cost he still pays at 68 years old. Because for Larry Bird, greatness didn't just come from talent, it came from never knowing when to stop. And that decision or refusal to decide may be the most haunting part of his story. When Larry Bird walked away from the game in 1992, he could have chosen the bright lights. He could have built an empire like Michael Jordan, stamping his name on sneakers, franchises, and billion-dollar brands. He could have mirrored his old rival Magic Johnson, who turned his charisma and Hollywood smile into a business portfolio stretching from real estate to movie theaters. If Bird had wanted it, the cameras would have followed him for the rest of his life. But Larry Bird never cared about any of that. For him, basketball was never a ticket to celebrity. It was a job one he performed with unmatched intensity, one he gave his body and soul to, but still a job. When it ended, he didn't need red carpets or flashing lights. What he wanted was something far more ordinary: peace. So he went home. Not to a mansion in Beverly Hills, not to a penthouse overlooking Manhattan, but back to Indiana. Back to where he had always felt grounded. Instead of luxury cars and private jets, Bird preferred his pickup truck and quiet routines. Neighbors would see him mowing his own lawn, grabbing breakfast at the local diner, or sitting quietly at high school basketball games. To the untrained eye, he looked more like a retired factory worker than one of the greatest athletes in history. This wasn't an accident. It was who he was. Bird grew up in French Lick, Indiana, a tiny town where his mother worked multiple jobs just to put food on the table. He knew struggle. He knew the value of $1. Fame and money, to him, were illusions. As he once put it, "I don't think money is the greatest thing in the world, but I think security is." Money's way overrated. That humility defined him, and it baffled people at the same time. How could a man who conquered the NBA, who stood shoulder to shoulder with Magic and Jordan, want so little in return? To some fans, his quiet life looks almost sad, as if Bird has disappeared, fading into obscurity while his peers became cultural icons. But to Bird, that quiet was victory. He had seen how fame ate people alive. He had seen teammates burn out chasing more. He wanted no part of it. Still, there is a bittersweet edge to this story. Because while Bird found peace in his modest lifestyle, it didn't erase the scars. His back still aches. His heart still betrays him. The body that made him a legend also confined him to a life where even simple pleasures are often shadowed by pain. And as content as he seems, Bird himself has admitted that regrets remain. He wonders what might have been if he had taken better care of his health, if he had been less stubborn about hiding his struggles, if he had allowed himself to slow down just once in his relentless career. And yet there's something undeniably powerful about the way he lives now. Larry Bird's quiet existence isn't a tragedy, it's a statement. In a world where athletes often chase the spotlight long after their playing days are over, Bird's retreat feels almost rebellious. He doesn't need the cameras to validate him. He doesn't need the headlines to remind people who he was. He knows. The game knows. The fans know. But behind the peace, behind the jeans and pickup trucks, lies a man still haunted by certain choices, by the pain he carries, and by the one thing no legend can ever escape: the weight of regret. One of the most painful was his first marriage. In 1975, Bird married his high school sweetheart, Janet Condra. On the surface, it looked like the perfect story: the local boy who had already begun to shine on the basketball court and the girl who had stood by him long before the fame. For a brief moment, it felt like the fairy tale ending every small-town kid dreams of: success, stability, and love. But real life doesn't always follow the script. Within a year, the marriage unraveled. The pressures of Bird's rising career, the distance, and the immaturity of two young people trying to navigate adult responsibilities all collided. The relationship collapsed, leaving Bird with scars that no championship could erase. Years later, Bird didn't sugarcoat it. He called it the worst mistake of my life. For a man who rarely opened up about his private emotions, those are sharp, revealing words. They tell us just how deeply that brief, broken marriage affected him. The regret ran so deep that Bird later admitted he sometimes had recurring nightmares, dreams, where he was trapped in that failed relationship, unable to escape, reliving the same mistakes again and again. It's a haunting confession, especially from someone known for his unshakable composure. In time, Bird found a steadier kind of happiness. In 1989, he married Dinah Mattingly, and together they built a quiet, enduring partnership that has lasted more than 3 decades. They adopted 2 children, and by all accounts, Dinah became his anchor, the steady presence who grounded him after the chaos of his playing days. Yet even with that stability, the shadow of his first heartbreak never fully disappeared. It was proof that even legends, the ones who seem untouchable on the court, can stumble in the most human ways off of it. Then came another test, the weight of wealth. Fame and fortune didn't transform Larry Bird into a Hollywood caricature. He never became the type to flaunt diamond chains or drive fleets of luxury cars. In fact, he became famous for the opposite. Bird stayed frugal, almost defiantly so. He was the NBA superstar who still mowed his own lawn, who lived without the extravagance that swallowed so many of his peers. He was proud of being the same Larry from French Lick, even when the world around him expected flash. But money has a way of complicating even the simplest lives. Bird's frugality kept him grounded, but his generosity exposed him. He gave freely to friends, often slipping them cash with the hope that it would help them get on their feet. But instead of gratitude, what he got back too often was betrayal. Bird later explained the painful lesson in blunt terms. "I used to give some money to friends, and, I found out that not only do you lose your money, you lose your friendship." Imagine that. A man who worked for every penny, who broke his body for every paycheck, discovering that generosity could turn friends into strangers. It hardened him. Slowly, Bird began cutting ties he never wanted to cut, not because he stopped caring, but because caring too much had cost him too much. And then there were the smaller regrets, the choices that might seem trivial from the outside but weighed heavily on him. The skipped medications when he believed toughness could replace treatment. The rehab sessions he walked away from because pride told him he didn't need them. Even his lifelong frugality, which kept him financially secure long after his playing days, sometimes became its own kind of prison. He could have afforded luxuries that might have eased his daily pain, but more often than not, he denied himself those comforts. Not because he couldn't, but because he wouldn't. That was French Lick in him again, the voice in his head whispering, "Don't waste, don't indulge, don't let yourself get soft." None of these regrets destroyed Larry Bird. They didn't erase his championships or diminish the respect he earned. But they shaped him. They chipped away at the edges, leaving a man who today, at 68, lives quietly, privately, removed from the spotlight he once commanded. A man who carries both pride and regret in equal measure. And perhaps that's the most haunting part of Bird's story. Not that he lost games, not even that his body betrayed him, but that even the greatest legends, the ones we put on pedestals and call larger than life, are still haunted by the same doubts, the same mistakes, and the same what-ifs that follow the rest of us. Larry Bird's story reminds us of a truth most fans don't want to face. Greatness doesn't erase regret, it just gives it a bigger shadow. So here's the paradox. Larry Bird is one of the greatest to ever play basketball.
2019 Lifetime Achievement Award recipients, Larry Bird.
He has a family, financial security, and a legacy that will live forever. And yet every morning he wakes with pain in his back. Every day he carries the risks of a fragile heart. And every night he knows there are choices he can't undo. He didn't fall into scandal. He didn't blow his fortune. His story isn't about failure, it's about sacrifice. He gave the game everything. And in return, it left him with pain, regret, and solitude. That's why people say, Larry Bird is 68, and how he lives is sad. It's not because he lost, it's because he gave too much. Larry Bird's life is both inspiring and sobering. He taught us that greatness demands everything: your body, your mind, your relationships, your future. And once you give those away, you can never fully get them back. So here's the question, was it worth it? Were the championships, the MVPs, the banners in Boston worth the pain that still follows him at 68? Tell me what you think in the comments. Because if Larry Bird's story proves anything, it's that greatness always comes with a price. And sometimes that price is far heavier than the glory we celebrate.